everyone, and welcome to the world of art. My name is Joanne Civil. Our guest today is author Anne Bourne. Anne Bourne has published a Marshmallow on the Bus, followed by Prayer Beads on the Train. She writes about family and life in a big city after growing up in a small one in Michigan. Most of her writing is done on the MTA, the New York City subway and bus system. Anne's work is published in the Newtown Literary Journal and the Silver Birch Press poetry series, Me as a Child and All About My Name. Her poetry has also been featured at Boundless Tales at the Astoria Bookshop in Queens, New York. She is a participating member of Poetry and Coffee and has been a featured performer with Inspired Word NYC at We Heart NYC, Writers Night, and Women Poets of Q4. Anne is a contributing author in the anthology Love Her Not, The Hillary Paradox, edited by Joanne Bamberger, and is also a performing artist in the Platform series at the New York Transit Museum. And she has appeared as a featured local poet with local poets at Inwood Local and with No Name NYC at Word Up Community Bookstore. Please help me in welcoming author Anne Bourne. Thank you so much for joining us today, Anne.
Oh, thank you.
We are going to be talking a lot about your books and your writing process and so on. But the first book we'd like to talk about today is A Marshmallow on the Bus. How did you come up with that title?
Oh, that came from a story that I told my children about the time that I took the bus from the Bronx into Manhattan. Mm-hmm. And I got off almost at the end of the stop, at the end of the run, at the end of the line. Mm-hmm. And as I'm getting off the bus, I notice in the aisle between the seats, smack in the center, was a perfectly formed, pristine white marshmallow. And I was fascinated that it could make it all the way from the Bronx. Yeah, I think that bus starts at Hunts Point. And it made it all the way into Manhattan with all of those people and somehow didn't get squished. So I started to tell my kids about it and they went, yeah, okay, like what's for dinner? And I said, no, wait a minute, there was a marshmallow on the bus this morning. That's where it came from. I needed to tell that story.
That's great. That's a great story. Now, you've written on buses, you've written on trains. What has inspired the stories that you've written in your book?
Well, I tell people that when I travel by myself, I like to bring everyone with me. And what happened was, like I said, I would get home and I would tell my kids, oh my gosh, there was this guy or there was this woman and then he had the Rubik's Cube and then she said this to the kid and yeah, I wasn't getting anywhere. That's where I started writing, and I realized that I had the best seat in the house because I could sit in the back of the bus with my notebook and my pencils, and I would just start writing. Sometimes I'd write about what I saw at the window or the way the Hudson looked. If I'd go down Riverside Drive, I'd write about stores on Broadway. I just needed to tell stories, and I thought it would be a way to bring people along with me.
What is one story that you can share with us that was the most humorous thing that you experienced on the subway system or on the train?
Well, you know, there's so many really laugh out loud in the moment stories. You know, for an entire month, I challenged myself to write a journal that I published in my second book, Prayer Beads on the Train. And you know, what I found was me laughing to myself sometimes at things that weren't even really funny. Like there were guys waiting in line at Rockefeller Center when I was waiting to get the train to Queens, and they were ordering donuts and they were laughing about the wife and how they were moving their cars and mowing their lawn. And I thought, it's no wonder that women can't find their way into a conversation with men in a corporate setting if that's what they find funny. You know, so I'm sitting and saying, you guys you know, I called them the Suits, of course. Listening to the Suits that morning was bizarre and weird and a revelation to me and really funny. They thought it was funny.
Really?
Yeah.
Speaking of revelations, have any come to you from writing on the transit system?
Well, yes. I have tremendous respect for the people that operate the transit system that I did not have before. I was one of the complainers. I would complain about the dirt or the noise or the fact that you couldn't hear the announcements. And now, because it's my salon, it's where I do most of my work, I tend to thank the guys that do this. You know, they have to point at that sign to show that they're still awake when they're running the trains, right? And I tend to thank them when I get off the train.
You travel a lot.
I do.
So tell me about one of your favorite terminals. Since you've been around the world, what's your favorite terminal that you've been to?
You mean in the subway system?
No, throughout your travels.
Throughout my travels. Well, the Paris subway system is amazing. That's iconic and beautiful and wonderful. I remember back in the day, they don't do this any longer, they used to have first class and second class carriages. And the sign in French would warn people not to get into the first class carriage with a second class ticket because you could be embarrassed. And I like that. Not that you'd be arrested or removed, but it could be embarrassing. And I thought, oh, how French. I like that.
You have a wonderful, dare I say, website, blog. It's a blog. It's called the Backpack Press.
Right.
And you write so much about your travels in there and so much about your life experiences.
Yeah.
And from what I read, one of the passions that you speak about is houses of worship.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about that. Where did that passion come out of?
Well, this came from sort of a reevaluation of what a church building does. And it doesn't have to be any particular denomination. It can be any denomination. It can even be churches that are repurposed. I just had lunch a couple of weeks ago in York, England, with my daughter. And we had lunch in a church because they're very concerned that church buildings that are no longer being used as churches can fall into disrepair. So this has been turned into a cafeteria. So we had lunch there surrounded by the dead guys on the floor and the statues and the stained glass windows, and it was tremendous. But what I have found is that when my life gets completely crazy and I can't make it to the end of a sentence without assistance, I can step into an empty church and everything dissipates quietly. And to me, it's a tremendous experience. And it's been very, very helpful in getting me to refocus and recharge. I have a passion for empty churches.
I feel like I know you so much better now. We would love to hear some of your work. Can you please read to us?
Absolutely. This is a story, it's one of my daughter's favorites, from a Marshmallow on the bus. It's called The Life of a Squirrel. I was on the bus this morning, on the way to my second bus to work, when I saw something move across the tree on the corner. Typically, nothing out the window catches my eye because it's so much the same every day. But this time, I watched as two crazy in love squirrels chased each other around the thick branches, ducking in and out of sight as if they were playing hide and seek. That's what squirrels do in mating season. Squirrels are everywhere in New York. Most people call them rats with bushy tails. But suddenly, I needed to know more about squirrels, so I did about 2 minutes worth of research on them and found out a couple of interesting squirrel facts. One is that late winter is indeed their mating season, and most adult squirrels live alone. Their life expectancy is on average around 6 years, and more city squirrels die dodging cars than by reaching the ripe old age of 6. Country squirrels are more likely to die when they can't find enough food. They live on nuts and berries, which I knew, and their name is derived from Greek, meaning one who lives in the shadow of their tail. So I wondered this morning what it's like to be a squirrel. There I was on my way to my office with the same emails and reports and phone calls and irritations I had yesterday or the day before. And here were these two amorous squirrels just chasing each other around the tree. I knew pretty much everything that would happen on my own next hour, but these little critters were completely free to script theirs. They could chase or make love or hunt for nuts together and then do it all over again, or just curl up inside that tree and nap, tails entwined together. What they do not know is that their life expectancy is only 6 years, assuming they are successful crossing the street later today. That is such a different way to go about business, not knowing your life expectancy. Maybe they think they're immortal, or that it's only cars that stand in the way of their living forever. Maybe they know that they need to make the most of the day, or maybe they just take the next hour at face value. I can't be certain. But I think taking an hour on squirrel terms might be preferable sometimes to my knowing everything about the next hour. Stay in the moment and see where it leads you. But today, the Ash Wednesday admonition is running in the back of this observation. The blessing about being dust and returning to dust. It's one of the reasons I don't like any part of that ash process. I prefer not to be reminded of my mortality today. I want to be like those two squirrels. They don't know what the day has to offer other than they have blue skies, their own tree, and each other for comfort and warmth. Today is a day for squirrels. They don't know cars will kill them if they aren't fast enough, and they don't know they will likely not see their 7th year. They just know what's in front of them today and that they need nuts to survive. No bills, no mortgage, no complicated family obligations, few worries other than their nut supply, and nobody expects them to do much. In many ways, I live in the shadow of my tail too. And today, for just the duration of a bus ride from the Bronx to Manhattan, I wanted to live the life of a squirrel. From the Marshmallow on the Bus.
That was really beautiful. That is one of the pieces that I read from your book that I loved.
Oh, thank you.
And it was really interesting to me that you said it's one of the pieces that your daughter loves. What did she express to you about the piece that caught her attention? And
well, it's funny because this is the one. I'm talking about my oldest daughter, Grace. There's something about this one that just spoke to her too, and I don't know if it's that she's had similar observations of squirrels or whether she likes the idea of not wanting to focus on your mortality today.
Now you have another book that's coming up pretty soon, but this is under your own imprint. Can you tell us a little bit about the imprint?
Well, I'm very excited about this. The Backpack Press, which started out in 1991 as a parents' newsletter at a school on the Upper West Side in Manhattan. And as it evolved, it became the imprint for the books that I've published, which is A Marshmallow on the Bus, Prayer Beads on the Train, and my latest, Waiting on a Platform. But as I got into it a little bit more, I realized that there was tremendous opportunity for me to publish other writers. So I put out a call to anybody who wanted to read my blog or follow me on Twitter or who follows me on Facebook, that I would be publishing under the Backpack Press as my own imprint. And I've gathered together now for my first effort to publish other writers. I've gathered together 24 other writers to put together an anthology of stories, their poems, their stories, their essays, their journal entries about the death of your parents. I thought it was a story that wasn't being told, and I figured out that this was the only way I was going to get my story out.
Now, the anthology that you're referring to is These Winter Months.
Yes.
And the copy that I have obviously is not a final copy.
Right.
But I had an opportunity to read a little bit about the project, and it's incredible. When most people write about death, it's about the mourning process and getting through it. But your book is different. When I read through the guidelines, it was more about explaining the breath in the middle that you have to take, the real experience that you go through beyond mourning. Can you tell us what actually created the Late Orphan Project?
Well, the Late Orphan Project came about after my father died in October of 2015. I knew that I had to talk about it. I knew I had to talk about what I was going through. And I figured that somehow, some way, what I was going through would be shared among other people, either of my age or other adults, and that's why they're called late orphans, because I think most people think of orphans as being children. But we are all children, and we are indeed these late orphans, people who, as young as high school in my project, and as old as my age and older, who have lost their parents. And what I found was that writing about, telling the story. Then I drove my dad to chemo and he got worse, and then he went into the hospital and the nurses were lovely, and then he died. That's easy. That's telling a story. That's relating what happened. That's telling me, and then we had to sell the house, and then we moved, and then we auctioned this, or we gave away that, or then I did this, or I had to go to Omaha, whatever. That story is very easy to tell. What's difficult is the day after. It's when it all settles in that suddenly, all of a sudden, you do not have your mother or your father, or in some cases, both. And it's that realization of how you assume the role of an adult, how you become how you sit in the front seat of the car for the first time with your father after your mother's died. And the stories aren't sad. They're so tremendously human and so honest. And, you know, as they came into the project, I would read them one by one, and I would focus on the one story. But then when I started to thread them together to create the anthology, these winter months, we find that the stories have beautiful common threads, but they're bold and they're honest, and they're stories that I think need to be told. I don't see a lot of this part of that process out there yet.
You explained on your blog, which was really interesting to me. You just mentioned it as well. Sometimes when death occurs, you take on a responsibility within the family. You become the person who fills that role.
Mm-hmm.
What role did you fill when you after your father passed?
Well, it's interesting because I shunned it completely. I was the grown-up all of a sudden. I had to make all of the decisions about the funeral and what would happen. I'm the one that elected that there would be full military honors. I did the things that I thought were clear and obvious. I routed the procession from the church to the cemetery. I made sure that the flowers were in the right place and that there was an appropriate lunch. But what I found is that every single step of the way, I wanted anybody else to do it but me. I wanted to enlist help. I just couldn't wrap my brain around how I could actually do this successfully. And I had absolutely no faith in my ability, and I did dumb things. Like I held up the entire procession from the church to the cemetery because I wanted to go up and thank the singer and the organist, and we started talking about the choir and how I used to sing in the choir, and it never occurred to me that an entire family and mourners and cars and all of this would be waiting for me. There were so many bits and pieces of this that I just didn't fit in naturally. I was doing things, but not well. Not well.
So basically, you were having a human experience.
Yes, absolutely. I rejected the flag. This incredible young man knelt in front of me and handed me the flag on behalf of the President of the United States. And I said, no, thank you, I can't take it. My cousins went, what have you lost your mind? You want your father's flag? I said, I don't have any place to put it. That was the best I could come up with. So it was only in retrospective later when I started to assess the goofy things that I did and the stupid things that I did and how I accomplished things of any sort that I realized that other people were probably doing this too, and I wanted to know what they had to say.
Now, with gathering the authors for the book and going through the reading process, have any of the other authors expressed any of their experiences while writing for this anthology? Well,
a lot of them want to edit. They want to say, oh my God, that's just so dumb. I can't believe I wrote that. Or, oh, that's wimpy. Wimpy was my favorite. That's really wimpy. People don't have any real appreciation for an honest story. It's so powerful, and these feelings are so universal because you're expressing small moments, small, very personal moments. You don't always have the sense that this speaks to the greater humanity, and it does, and it sometimes it cries out, and it's what makes this project so exciting.
Yes. You have a special cousin that you wrote about on your blog about your experience with her and how her life experience married into a mass that you went to recently for your father.
Right.
And I love how you expressed how her life experiences influenced your life and also influenced your writing.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about your cousin?
Well, my cousin Marion died in February, suddenly. She had always said that she didn't want to be a burden to her family or that she didn't want to be incapacitated. She was nervous and I think probably anxious about later in life. She was almost 80 years old when she died. She would call herself my father's cousin. But we were separated for such a long time by the kind of dumb things that families do. I knew her when I was a child because she would be at my grandparents' events. But then when my grandparents moved to Florida, I was living in Michigan at the time, we didn't get together with them. And there were family issues that I never understood and probably would still never understand. But she attended my mother's wake when my mother died in 2012. And we started communicating again. I would call her, she would call me, we would get together for dinner, we would have lunch, and every chance I got, I would get in touch with my cousin. She's the one that taught me about what I call the Communion of Saints. It's a kind of thing that Catholic schools teach kids in grade 1, where you recite the prayer and you say, I believe in the Communion of Saints, and then you don't get it, you don't understand it, but Marian knew what that meant. I had an incident in a cemetery. I also love cemeteries. Empty churches and cemeteries are my passion. Oh, and T4. But I was in the cemetery and I found a gravestone for a great aunt who died in the 1930s, so I would never have known her. And I called Marian and I said, Marian, I really need photographs of her. She said, well, you know, something will show up. I think you're onto something, you know. So I went to one of those silly Facebook sites. If you grew up in Southwest Michigan, then you must remember this. And typically it's people saying, do you remember the hardware store on Main Street? Well, I don't remember the hardware store on Main Street. That was a very long while ago. But I saw some photographs and somebody wrote, grandmother Reed. And I went, oh my. It never occurred to me that if she's buried in my hometown, her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren probably all still live there. And this turned out, and I went back to Marian. I said, Marian, you're not going to believe this, but the day after we talked about how I really wanted to see a photograph, I got 1,000 photographs. He sent me a dozen at a time in email after email after email, and now I'm up to my ears in photographs. And what does she say? Of course, it's the Communion of Saints. And I went, I get it now. I get it now. My ancestors surround me.
That was the piece.
Yeah.
I love that piece.
Thank you.
I would love to hear another, well, I would love for you to share another story with your audience today.
Awesome. I have 2 quick poems that I wrote. You know, as I started to perform in open mics, specifically in Queens, I started reading at Coffee in Long Island City. I realized that poetry was a quicker way to get my message across rather than a longer essay. This is from Prayer Beads on the Train, and it's called To Dance. What if you asked me to dance? Would you see that I don't know how? Would you feel me resist when you offer your hand? Would you sense my fear as you placed your arm around my back? We're talking, saying nothings, not listening to each other, but the music. Please let me sit down. I'm embarrassed, exposed. I'm afraid. All bravado with no substance as we move together, all silk and feathers essence as the music plays and the players ignore us. I want to beg you to let me stop, but I can't say anything now because the dancing with you takes hold. And I understand that I knew how to dance all along. It's just today I'm learning how to dance with you.
That's beautiful.
And I have one that I'd like to read. This one I wrote in Queens.
Yay, Queens!
Absolutely. It's called Night Q. I was coming back from a wonderful session with the Risk of Discovery series in Queens, and I wrote this. Night Q. It's nearly 9 and the sun hasn't set, leaving a band of desert red sky like burning embers on the sand. It sits along the horizon waiting for the dark to finish. The players are all gone and the train comes in, wheels clank turning, sounding as if they had flat, sharp sides instead of round rolling ones. The air in the car isn't fresh, but it's cool, the way the refrigerator feels when you open it while you're boiling water on the stove. 2 guys meet, sit, talk, laugh, tapping their shoes to some ongoing beat I can't hear from their shared headphones. 2 girls with the colored hair hold their phones. They're talking one to the other, but not looking when they do. Broadway, then 36th Avenue, and nobody enters. The sun will set late tonight. Regular street lights pass by. Somebody's bedroom drapes are left open because they are certain nobody watches them out the window of a moving train. Sparkling planes overhead glittering out of LaGuardia. The man in the white pants looks like he wants to be going someplace, but he doesn't get on the train, and his chubby feet don't touch the platform as he sits on the bench. I'm watching the man with the blue cooler now. The car is pretty empty, and still he stands, reading the map. Where to go with a blue cooler? The office windows are all lit over there across the way, but there's nobody working in them at this hour. The Capital Bank sign is lit too, and the lights of the station are pulling us in. The train car screeches and strains to make the sharp curve. But the train window signs have gone dark, so a woman stares in the window, dramatically cupping her hands around her eyes, nodding to the man next to her. She really needs to know what train this is, because she's afraid it might not be the one she wants. I would like to let her know it's my train, but I'm done with it now, and she can have it.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you.
What is the connection with you in Queens? Most people.
Oh, well, I live in the Bronx.
Stay in their little parts of the boroughs, and
I live in the Bronx. I actually lived in Manhattan for about 25 years, and I moved to the Bronx about 5.5, almost 6 years ago. But when I retired from Columbia, I was an administrator at Columbia University for a very long while. The day after, a very dear friend of mine asked me if I wanted to work in customer service. So I got very brave. The first time I came to Queens, I was very, very nervous. I had only been here twice before. And then I thought, wow, this is awesome. I can get to Queens. I can do anything. I could even go to Staten Island if I had to, you know. Because you're right. You know, you walk out the door and you turn right, and then you walk out the door and you turn right, and then you walk out the door and you turn right. But I work in Long Island City, and I found that suddenly I had a whole new cast of characters on my morning commute. You know, I had the suits at Rockefeller Center when I changed trains. I had all of these amazing little signs that I still have to write about. There's these little signs that are tucked into the F train that goes from Rockefeller Center to Long Island City, where I get off at my stop. And they advertise spiritual advisors in Brooklyn. I'm fascinated by them, and I haven't figured out how to write about them, but every time I see one of the signs, I collect them. And when I get on the train and I see Keanu, then I feel like, oh, you know, now I know where I am. I'm cool. But what happened was that right after work, I found so many different places to go. Astoria Bookshop and the open mics at Coffee, and now at Q4, QED in Astoria, all of these wonderful series, Poetry and Coffee, Risk of Discovery, Boundless Tales, and the Newtown Literary Journal. To me, was so exciting. I felt suddenly at home.
It's amazing. You were recently published in Newtown, correct?
I was. It was so exciting. And I'll be honest, I thought my friend just took my poem and put it in, and then I found out that they actually had people read it. And that was very exciting to me.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, this has been an interesting conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today, Anne. We all enjoyed your stories. Thank you for reading and sharing your life experiences. And again, if you would like to follow Anne, you can go to her blog, which is the Backpack Press. You can also follow her on Twitter at Niles, N-I-L-E, Site, S-I-T-E. And remember, she has this wonderful book that's coming up pretty soon. It is These Winter Months, which is the anthology of the late Orphan. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you soon.